Let's have a nice cup of TRE in the afternoon with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Peter Florence, a festival director and climate action producer. He directed the Hay Festivals from 1988 to 2020 and ran The Word, the London Festival of Literature from 1999 to 2004. He chairs the Bollinger Everyman Woodhouse Prize for comic fiction and has chaired the juries on the Booker Prize. He's joining us today to talk about The Conversation, a series of weekly conversations exploring the biggest topics of the day, from global conflicts to the climate crisis, with Britain's leading thinkers, scientists, philosophers, historians, war correspondents and writers. It started on the 14th of January and is running all the way till the 22nd of April at St Martin in the Fields. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you with us. So tell us where you got the idea from for The Conversation. It's a lovely concept.
Oh, I travelled around a lot to a lot of festivals over the last few years, and I went to this amazing place in Reykjavik, which hosted something called the Long Table. And the basic idea was that everybody is welcome at the Long Table to take part, to speak up, to be heard. And it's sort of, it reflected an idea that I've always had when I go to festivals, which are, I love the crazy energy of festivals. You go to, I don't know, 10 events a day and you get your mind blown all the time. But there's not always the reflective space. And I wondered how we could put those two things together and create a kind of an evening, which is an evening of two halves. And in the first half, you get a familiar idea of a big one-to-one interview with somebody who is engaging and inspiring and a storyteller. And in the second half of the evening, you sit around tables with people you came with or people you've just met, and you talk with each other and with the guest speakers over the next hour or so about what you've heard and what you think. And it's really finding a way of prioritizing the audience in these events and not just saying, look, here is a panel and here is an audience, but you're saying we're all part of this conversation. And I welcome it and love it. And we've tried it a few times. We tried a pilot season in the summer last year with Stephen Fry and Jung Chang and Ben Okri and people. And it was kind of thrilling just going down into that magical place, the Crypt in St Martin in the Fields, which is this beautiful cafe bar where you can just feel as if you are in a really intimate space, although it's actually quite big. And you just keep talking. And it's very much the sort of, the after show conversation you have with your friends, and you say, well, what about when they said this? And what did you think? And I love all that. And we found it really works. So when we were putting this season together, we thought we still want to stay with the big issues, because St Martin in the Fields is many things. It's a church. It's also an institution which has been the birthplace of lots of social justice movements, Amnesty International, Shelter, Liberty, the Pride movement. And you never know what's going to come out. You never know what's going to happen in this space with the people who come here. And it's the most central venue in London, right on Trafalgar Square. So we wanted to try and acknowledge and celebrate the fact that their audience and cares about the things that really matter and are frankly really frightening. I mean, never more so than today in the world. And so we wanted to say, look, come and hear some people who might give you a new vision of that, a new understanding, a new insight into very familiar everyday news ideas. As you say, climate action, war, the abuses of power. And at the same time, say, the creative, sort of imaginative world has something to contribute that's slightly different from the news gathering world. Mm-hmm. And I like it that writers just tell different truths.
Yeah. Oh, I can see why it works so well. I was going to pick up on what you said about if you've gone to an event or a festival or you're watching a talk, whether it's something you're watching online or you've gone to somewhere and bought a ticket sitting down in the audience, when you leave, you want to still talk about it, either with the people that you went to the event with, or if you're on your own, you want to call someone or meet with someone and share with them what you just learned or what you just heard. So it makes total sense to keep that conversation flowing with the person who's just done the talk, being able to not just ask questions, but, well, as it says in the title, have a conversation about it.
Yeah, it's really key, actually. And people sometimes want to ask questions in big gigs, and it's slightly daunting being a member of the audience, having to stand up at a microphone and ask a question. Actually, you want to do it in a much more personal way, face to face. And that thing of being, on the other side of the table, just around the campfire, in the room, with somebody, I think is really important. And the guests sort of treat it, if you go to a wedding and you see the bride and groom and they're dancing around all the tables going to say hello to everyone who's there. It's a bit like that, actually. You table hop and pick up ideas. And we did one last week with Lindsay Hilsum, the extraordinarily clever, civilized, insightful Channel 4 war correspondent. She's the international correspondent of ITN, I think. And after the big one-on-one interview she did, and she had beautiful readings with Lisa Dwan as well, the actor from Black Shore and Top Boy, she then sat and talked to a lot of the young people who were there for ages and ages. And everybody felt as if they'd had an experience which wasn't just the normal going to a talk gig. It was a little more special, and I think that's a magical thing for London.
Yes, it brings you closer to people that maybe you might not have felt that you'd have the opportunity to get closer to. That's a huge difference, going to a talk and sitting in the audience to spending time with that person and having a chat about something. It sort of bridges the gap between the performer and the audience member. Exactly.
And, some of these speakers are really coming out like superstars in their own field. So we're starting on the 28th of January, Tuesday week. We've got Robert McFarlane, who, in my mind is the sort of greatest living writer of the natural world. He writes about the language that we use to describe it. He writes about mountains and rivers, and there has never been a time when rivers were in greater crisis than they are now. Similarly, in sort of climate terms, we've got Gaia Vince and Monica Ferrier-Tinto coming towards the end of the run on Earth Day in April to talk about what we can do. I mean, everybody always comes out of these inspiring sessions saying, what can I do? Well, actually, we can get together and we can lobby and we can act and we can create that kind of, that impetus that St. Martin in the Fields has always given so many different causes. And alongside that, there are simply just wonderful stories to be told. Stories about London from Hanif Qureshi and Marion Turner, who's coming to talk about all Chaucer's pilgrims. And also stories about wonder. We have Maggie Adair Pocock, the great astronomer, coming to celebrate what we're learning from the Webb telescope, which is sending back the most extraordinary images of the universe. And wonderful Bethany Hughes, who's staying at least on planet Earth, talking about the seven wonders of the world. So there are these things alongside more war correspondents. Fergal Keane and Osni Zeyerstadt, who are coming to share their very different experiences of being on front lines. And, these conflicts are not going to simply go away, and we need to just find new ways of looking at them, partly to refresh the way in which we think about war, but also to refresh the way in which we think about the power that tips us into war.
Yeah.
And I think that's really crucial, because Nicholas Heitner, who is one of my favorite ever theatre directors, is coming to do a session about his new production at the Bridge, which is opening in a couple of weeks' time, about Richard II with Helen Castor, the Cambridge historian, and the whole idea of who is in power and what trouble they're going to get us into and how they feel about wielding their power. All those things that Shakespeare writes about so brilliantly are never more urgent and vital to, the daily conversation we have about whether it's who's president of the United States or who's leader of the opposition in Britain or whatever's going on in Europe in any of these extraordinary power struggles that are going on all over the place. These issues that seem literary and historical. And most of all, Tom Holland, who's the now podcast king of the world with The Rest is History, is coming to talk about Suetonius's history of the Caesars. We think Trump's unique. He's not. We've seen him before. We've seen him in ancient Rome. We keep seeing him throughout history. I think that's the big thing about this series. It's putting everything into perspective and giving it a context and making the conversation fun.
Yeah, it must be very exciting looking for and deciding the guests and the speakers that you're going to have. I mean, there's so much choice, isn't there? How do you decide which ones to include?
Well, you're right. It's the jammiest gig anyone could hope for. I think you start off from thinking, what are the huge issues facing the world, and who is currently thinking and writing about those same issues in a slightly oblique way, but in the most engaging and provocative way that will make you look at them and think again. And whatever sort of programming you're doing, you're just looking for people who are really entertaining, because this isn't a sort of dry academic lecture series. It's supposed to be a vital, interactive, participatory conversation about things that matter to everybody. And so, you look about, I'd always look and think, well, who's writing best? Who's talking best? Who do I know will tell a good story, make people just jolt their minds maybe into a new way of looking at things? And we've been incredibly lucky with all these years roster of artists, which also includes, the great statistician David Spiegelhalter, who came to the fore in public attention during COVID for trying to interpret or trying to show us how to interpret the facts, and Roman Krishnarik, who I think is probably, if he's known to your audiences, will be known as the guy who is the great empathy champion. But he's also writing really importantly about what history teaches us about the future. It's not a natural line of progression from the past to the future. And the present is ever alarming and ever surprising. But I love the idea that you can sit down and have exactly the kind of conversation you'd have around the family supper table or in the pub or with your mates, and have it just tweak that bit more with a bit of expert advice that might set you off in a different direction.
Yeah. And in terms of festival organising in general and directing festivals, that, as I said in the introduction, you've done for many, many years, and different types of festivals as well, is there a kind of blueprint that you would stick to that you've worked out in the way to do it, or does it totally depend on the type of festival? I mean, it sounds like an incredibly complicated thing to do where so many things could go wrong.
The one thing I have learned from doing this for 35 years, off and on, all over the world, is that there is no blueprint. You make it up as you go along, and you have to see what works for wherever you are. What works in Cheltenham may not work in Bradford. What works in Edinburgh may not work in London. And I think the joy of this series is that instead of cramming, 400 events into 10 days, where overload is the point, you're going for a kind of full-on maximalist, totalizing experience. I've maybe got to the point myself where I think, I love all that stuff that you learn, but I want more time to let it sink in. So having a weekly series where A, I can prep for the interviews for a week, and B, I can have time to let last week's wash over me and sink in. And Coleridge has this just brilliant metaphor or image for what literary criticism is like. And he says it's like walking along a beach after the tide has gone out and examining the marks in the sand. And I like that idea of being able to experience something, have a conversation about it, and then think about it for a few days.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I'm just slowing down, but maybe it's also that sometimes you want sort of depth rather than sort of totalizing assault of the senses. And I like the idea in London. You can, if you want to, come every week, think about things together with other people who are also there to share ideas and share stories. And it's a different sort of festival. And I like it. And I love the sort of the diversity and the energy of London. I mean, you get people of all backgrounds, all ages, and all experience coming in to take part in these events. And I think that's really fascinating. And I'm not sure it's replicated in many other places anywhere on earth, actually.
I love the idea that you might have people coming along who have a clear view on the subject matter that's being talked about, and then having listened to the speaker and having got involved with the conversation, that they might leave thinking something completely different, which is great.
Well, yeah, isn't it the great dream of kind of being kind of a grown up and being civilized that you might change your mind?
Yes, quite.
You never want to get stuck in a rut of thinking the same thing over and over. I mean, it's just because the world doesn't work like that. There are too few things that are absolutely continuously the same. And finding people who will just maybe all education and all entertainment is always like this. You're just opening your eyes and thinking again. And I think that's a fantastic gift if you can share it.
Yeah. Well, if people want more information about the conversation, the interesting thing is, or one of the interesting things is, if people aren't in London or can't get to London, you can see them online.
Yeah, we're streaming everything live, and they're also available afterwards on sort of on demand. And I hope people will be able to come. But actually, the digital experience is also really interesting, if somewhat different. I mean, use the talk boards, use the conversations that are online to develop the similar kind of thing that's going on in the crypt in St. Martin in the Fields. But everyone is welcome. I think that's the open heart and the open arms. Come along, join in and contribute to it and make it yours.
So what's the best place for people to go to find out more and get tickets and things?
If you come to the St. Martin in the Fields website, which is really easy to find in any search engine, we are right there on the homepage under the What's On section. Lovely, shockingly yellow branding we've got, alongside some of their classical music and their church services. This is very publicly a secular, not in any sense religious event. We do talk about spirit, we do talk about what moves us, but actually not in a religious context. We talk about the humanity of it, and I hope that anyone who came would be able to enjoy it.
Great. Oh, I think so. I wish I lived closer. I'd be there all the time. Well,
thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us, Peter Florence, talking about the conversation. stmartininthefields.org is the website if people want to go on and get tickets, either to be there in person or to watch it all online. Hope it all goes well or continues to go well. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.